When Donald Trump was elected into office as the President of the United States, one of his biggest foreign policy focuses was China. From the beginning of his administration, Trump adopted a confrontational stance toward Beijing, framing China not just as a competitor, but as a strategic threat to American economic dominance and national security. He claimed that China was stealing intellectual property, manipulating its currency, and engaging in unfair trade practices that hurt American industries and workers. This issue, as some believe, is causing damages to American jobs and wealth. But is this really true? Is it true that China has unfairly gained at the expense of the United States? Or is it just a convenient narrative used to justify deeper geopolitical tensions? Well, to understand this, let's discuss the data and narrative deeper. Before we understand all of the data, we must also first understand the history on how China became a threat to the United States. The threat that many claimed that China possesses can be traced back to when it joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2001. Many people voiced their support for this cause. One prime example is then US President Bill Clinton, who strongly advocated for China's entry into the WTO. Clinton argued that integrating China into the global trading system would not only benefit the US economy through increased exports and market access, but also encourage China to adopt political and economic reforms. He famously stated that bringing China into the WTO would secure a future of greater openness, greater freedom, and greater prosperity for China and for the world. Since China entered the WTO, however, the US-China relationship soon became characterized by a widening trade deficit. If we graph out the trade balance of the United States and China, we get to see that the trade balance has widened massively. Up to 2018, the trade balance was a massive $418 billion. This meant that the United States imported $418 billion more in goods from China than it exported to China. This is one of the central feats as to why some critics argued that China had stolen jobs from the United States, and that's because this trade imbalance coincided with a dramatic decline in American manufacturing jobs. For instance, if we graph out the manufacturing employee figures of the United States, we get to see that for most of the second half of the 20th century, manufacturing jobs had been constant. But as you can see here, in 2001, which was the year when China joined the WTO, the US manufacturing employment data had dropped significantly. In January of 2001, the US had 17 million manufacturing jobs. But as you can see, the jobs had dropped to where it stayed constant at around 11 to 12 million. That's a significant drop. And this is what caused many people like Donald Trump to rise to political prominence by tapping into the anger and frustration of displaced American workers. Trump capitalized on this economic anxiety during his 2016 presidential campaign, framing the loss of manufacturing jobs as a direct consequence of China's entry into the World Trade Organization and decades of what he called terrible trade deals. But just how does this work? Well, the argument here is that rising imports from China have led to significant job losses in American manufacturing. Many economists have extensively documented what has been termed the China shock, the abrupt increase in Chinese imports that affected local labor markets. Their studies estimate that competition from Chinese imports cost between 1 and 2.4 million manufacturing jobs in the US during the early 2000s to the early 2010s. For instance, one study estimated that US manufacturing employment fell sharply in regions where industries faced heavy import competition from China. Workers in these regions not only lost jobs, but often experienced wage depressions and long-term reductions in income. The Economic Policy Institute, EPI, has also estimated that the growing US-China trade deficit eliminated or displaced between 2.7 and 3.7 million jobs over nearly 2 decades. Put simply, these imports have done damage to the American manufacturing industry because they allowed cheaper Chinese goods to outcompete domestically produced products, forcing many American factories to either downsize or shut down entirely. Companies that couldn't match China's low production costs due to higher US wages, stricter regulations, and other overhead expenses found themselves priced out of both domestic and international markets. As a result, they outsourced operations abroad or exited the market altogether, leaving American workers jobless and communities economically devastated. Here's a graph to show you the net job losses due to the growing trade deficits. Data from an EPI analysis. Here, you can see that job losses from 2001 to 2006 were massive. They were hundreds of thousands for some states. But amongst the most damaged here aren't actually California nor Texas. If we graph out the net job loss as a share of total employment, we get to see that Idaho, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, most of which are smaller states with a heavy reliance on specific manufacturing sectors, were disproportionately affected. These are indeed striking examples of how trade impacts are not distributed evenly across the country. However, this narrative of job stealing does not really capture the full picture. Some critics point out that while some regions were hit hard, other sectors of the economy have expanded, and overall job creation in services and technology has offset some of the losses in manufacturing. For instance, if we graph out the employment in services as a percentage of total employment for the United States, we get to see that service jobs have increased substantially since 2001. Here, you can see the exact opposite of what has occurred in manufacturing jobs. America might have lost manufacturing jobs, but they gained millions in services, tech, healthcare, education, finance, and other white-collar industries. Secondly, one must also understand that the low import prices that China has brought has led to productivity gains and have allowed American companies to lower costs, benefiting consumers with cheaper goods and improving overall living standards. In fact, here's a table published by the Consumer Technology Association in which they estimate the impacts on consumers on Trump's proposed tariffs. Here you can see that they estimate that laptops and tablets would increase in price by over 45%, while smartphones by over 25.8%. What this basically means is that American consumers have been significant beneficiaries of low-cost Chinese manufacturing, often without realizing it. The affordability of everyday electronics, clothing, furniture, toys, and household goods is largely thanks to China's role in global supply chains. And thirdly, one should also understand that it's not just China that has led to job losses. It is also because of automation and information technology. Since the start of the 21st century, we have seen the rapid acceleration of automation, robotics, and information technology, all of which have significantly transformed the way goods are produced. Now, beyond jobs, there is another claim that some make, and that is how China is stealing American wealth. More specifically, America's intellectual property. There are so many studies out there detailing how China has cost the US economy through IP theft. Some US officials and analysts estimate these have cost between $225 billion to $600 billion annually in lost revenue and innovation. One of the most famous examples of IP theft can be traced back to Micron Technology. Micron, which is one of the world's biggest chip makers, was embroiled in a long-running dispute involving a Chinese competitor, Fujian Jinhua, which was accused of using trade secrets from Micron to develop competing products. Although legal outcomes have varied, this case is emblematic of the broader issues surrounding technology transfer and IP theft. The impact that this may have brought to the US is that it undermined the competitiveness of American firms. Companies like Micron invests billions of dollars annually in research and development to stay ahead in an industry defined by innovation and complexity. When trade secrets are stolen and replicated, often without the same R&D costs, it gives competitors an unfair advantage, allowing them to produce similar products at lower costs and undercut American companies in the global market. This is indeed a reality if China had stolen intellectual property from Micron and other American companies. They may indeed have stolen some form of wealth. However, some analysts say that while cases like Micron are individually significant, they actually represent a fraction of the reported instances of intellectual property theft linked to China. So, as you can see, these challenges are indeed real. And that is why some Americans have come to view China not merely as a trade competitor, but as a long-term strategic threat. Concerns about intellectual property theft, forced technology transfers, and unfair industrial policies have fueled a bipartisan consensus in Washington that the US must now actively compete with, and in some cases, contain, China's technological rise. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.